In this webinar, we're just going to be focusing on a kind of specific part of transitioning Web App Builder to Experience Builder. And so we're going to be looking at the Smart Editor and how to get that into Experience Builder utilizing the Smart Forms. We're first just going to start by reviewing the differences between the Smart Forms and Smart Editor. And then we're going to do a demo transitioning the Smart Editor to Smart Forms with a Cemetery Editor web app application. And then I'm just going to showcase some examples of the editing capabilities that are unique to Smart Forms that you aren't able to get within Web App Builder. So just to start, here are some of the differences between the two. So with Web App Builder, the Smart Editor widget, you're going to be configuring it within Web App Builder, and it cannot be carried over into other applications. Whereas with the Smart Forms, we're going to be configuring within the web map. So all of the Smart Form editing settings that you're going to be configuring will be utilized, can be utilized in field maps as well as Experience Builder using the same web map. Another difference is that the editing settings are configured within like the interface of the Smart Editor widget and are limited within the setting options that they offer. And you can't use arcade expressions. Whereas with the Smart Forms, it's going to be utilizing arcade expressions to create all those editing configurations. And so it does require some knowledge of arcade, but it also has endless possibilities for customization since you're using arcade. Another thing I wanted to touch on is just the related record editing is going to be a little bit different on how you configure it. Debatable which one is more intuitive, but they're just different. So we're going to be going over that and how to set it up within the Smart Forms. I also wanted to touch on some Smart Form limitations. So one limitation is that you'll have to go back and forth between the application and the web map to configure the editing settings. And so rather than being able to configure them in Experience Builder, you'll have to kind of go back to the web map, configure something, and then go back to Experience Builder. Also, it requires knowledge of arcade to create expressions. So that could be a limitation if you're not as familiar with arcade. Also, wanted to touch on that for editing related tables. It requires an enterprise version of 11.2 or above for being able to edit those utilizing the Smart Forms. So I've definitely run into that issue before, so that's something to keep in mind. And lastly, this isn't directly related to the Smart Forms, but just something I wanted to touch on between transitioning from Web App Builder to Experience Builder is that the batch attribute editor is still not available yet for Experience Builder. So it's projected for 2025 and AGO and Enterprise 11.5. So just keep an eye out for that. You still won't be able to have that functionality yet in Experience Builder, but it is coming. So now we're just going to move over into the demo. And I've included some additional resources which we can send out, just some Esri blogs of expressions that you can use to transition the Smart Editor to Smart Forms, and also just a matrix going between the different widgets with Experience Builder and Web App Builder, if you're interested. Alrighty. So here we have a Web App Builder application that is used for editing cemetery graves. And so if we're starting off and we're trying to transition this to Experience Builder, what we're going to be doing first is just checking out what is in the Smart Editor widget and how is it configured, so we can see if we can replicate that. So we can see which layers are editable within here. And we'll see that the trees and graves layer are editable. And then we also have a related table that is also editable. So the burial records that is on the grave layer. And then over here, we'll check out our smart actions. So we have one smart action, and this is basically, it's an expression you can set up so that if it's evaluated to be true, then it will do the action that you've set up. So if we look at this one, we have one set up where an expression is set up for owner name is blank. So if that is true, then it's going to hide these two fields from the editor. So purchase date and purchase price. And then we also have attribute actions. So in Smart Editor, you get 4 options. You can do intersection, address, coordinates, or presets. So for this particular app, we have intersection set up for grave ID, block, and sections. So if we look further into this, we can see that for some of the fields, like for cemetery trees, I have it set up so that the grave ID field for cemetery trees is being auto-calculated through an intersection with the graves layer, and it's bringing in that facility ID field as long as it's within 3 feet. So I have that set up for the trees, and then I also have it set up for block and section so that if it intersects a block, which is another polygon layer within the cemetery data, it's going to return the block number as well as the section number. And I have that set up for the trees as well as the grave layer. So these are auto-calculating. And then down here we have presets. So I have it set up for the purchase date to be preset to the current date. And then I have the price set up to be preset to a fixed number. So those are the configurations that we're going to be trying to replicate within the smart forms. And we'll just do a little demo to see how it's working here. So if I do a tree, we'll see that we're getting it to auto-calculate section and block number, as well as grave ID. And then if I click a grave, we'll see that it is also doing that intersection with block and section. And then we don't see the fields purchase date and purchase price because of that smart action. But if I add a name, we'll see purchase date and purchase price come up with preset values. Okay, so now that we kind of know what we're working with, we're going to move over to the web map. So what I would do if I was transitioning this application over is that I would, first go to the web map that is being used in the web app application, make a copy of it, and then start kind of configuring that one just so you don't mess up anything that is, in your previous application. So over here we have all of our layers, and what we're going to do is select a layer. So we're going to start with the graves. And so I have it selected, and if I go over to the right, we'll see all the options, and then there's one for forms. So this is where our smart forms is going to be located. So if I click on it, we're going to see an area where we can actually configure the editing form. So these are all the fields that are in the graves layer. And just remember in Web App Builder, the graves layer had fields that were using intersections for block and section to auto-calculate it. And we also had preset values for purchase date and purchase price, and a smart action that was using owner name. So just keep that in mind because that's what we're going to be replicating here. So I'm just going to first bring in the fields that I know I need. And then if we select a field, we're going to get some more formatting options that we can do. So I'm just going to change the display name to make it a little bit more readable. You can add a description. And then now I'm going to move on to setting up those intersections with the block and section fields. So if I click block, I'm going to go down, and then over here in the logic section, we have calculated expressions. So I'm going to add a calculated expression. And that's going to open an arcade window that then I can put in my arcade expression. So let's do block by intersect. And for the sake of time, I've already set up some arcade expressions that I'm going to use. And I can also share these for your use if you'd like. But I'm just going to copy this paste it into the arcade expression builder. And basically what the script is doing is that it's getting the block layer, which is in the map. It's getting the centroid of the grave polygon feature that is selected. It's doing an intersect, returning the first of that intersect. And as long as there was a value that was intersected, it's going to return the block layer field name. And if not, will return no block found. So if I test it, we'll see we get a block number. And I'm not going to go fully into how all the arcade expressions work, but just for reference over here, if you're building an expression, we have profile variables, so you can get the data that you actually need to be working with. And then also we have functions over here to help you, um, you know, do calculations. So now that I've completed that arcade expression, I'll click OK. And now we have block layer, which is calculated with that intersect expression. And I'm going to do the same thing for the sections. So I'm going to add another expression. And I'm just going to be using the same code pretty much from the last one, but I've just catered it to be for sections. So if we run this, we'll get the section number. So now we've replicated that intersect functionality. And then I know that in the Web App Builder app, we had purchase date and purchase price as preset values. So I'm just going to add more expressions for that. And if you're doing a preset value, there's a pretty simple function we can use. We're just going to use return. And then for the date, I want it to be the current date. So I'm going to use a function that is for now. If I run that, it returns current date. So that one is good. And then we'll do one for purchase price. Cannot spell today. Return. So I want it just to return a fixed value of 200. So I run that, you get 200. And then we also had that smart action that was hiding purchase date and purchase price if owner name was null. So I'm going to set that up here. And how I do that is that I'm going to select the field that I want to have the action be occurring on. I'm going to go down here to logic, and we have editable, required, and visible. So this is kind of similar to the smart action options. This is visible instead of hidden. But if I go over here, I can add an expression, and this is going to look a little bit more similar to the Web App Builder expression builder. And I'm going to choose owner name. And since it's visible instead of hidden, it's actually going to be is not an empty string. It's a little confusing, but I'll change the name. Okay. So now this purchase date has this expression on it where if owner name is not null, it's going to be visible. And what's cool about it and with the calculated expressions is that once you've set it up, I can add that same expression to a different field. So I can go here and owner name is right there, and I have the same expression working on both of these fields. And you could do that with the calculated expressions as well. And now lastly, we know that graves had a related table, which is the burial records. And so to add that here, we go down and you should see that the related records is automatically an option to add to your forms. And I can change the display name. And also I want it to display the different names for each record so that we can tell which record goes to who. So I'm just going to change this to full name. And now we can test it out. So to test it out, we'll go over here and go to the Edit button. And this is going to look pretty much exactly how it's going to look in the editor widget in Experience Builder. Um, so just keep that in mind that this is kind of how it's going to be in Experience Builder. And so if I select a grave, we'll see that block and section have been auto-calculated. We have our burial records and it has the name, and it's hiding right now purchase date and purchase price, but if I add a name, that comes up and with the preset values. So now we've pretty much have set up graves to be how it was in the Web App Builder application. And one thing to note is that if you are editing the related records, so I do have the related records on here, and then when I open it, this is a separate form that you can also configure. So if I wanted to configure the burial records editing form, I actually just have to go to the burial records in the map and then go over here to that forms. And then that's where I can configure what fields, and you can add expressions here, etc. So one thing I also wanted to show you, which is cool that you can't do in Web App Builder, is that on the graves layer, I'm going to make it so that I'm going to have a field that's going to have the burial record names and have it be concatenated with a comma. And so let's say if you had two burial records for one grave, it would take both of those records, take the full name, and then just concatenate it with a comma into this one field. So let's see. We're going to add a new expression. I'm going to do burial name, and I already have that expression set up down here. So we're just going to grab that. And if we run this, we'll see that it's returning the names of the related records and the names of who is in that grave. So how it's working is it's getting the related table through this feature set by relationship name. It's getting that full name field, and then it's creating a list where it's going through each related record and then pushing that full name of each record into a list and then returning it by concatenating it with a comma. So this is helpful if you're an Experience Builder and you want to be able to search the grave layer by the name from the related records. This could allow you to do that there. So let's just test out how that looks. So if I select a record, we'll see that now this deceased name field has both of the names of the related records that are over here. And so if I click one and I change it, let's do Jerry, we'll see that it also updates the field here. So that's just one thing I wanted to show you that's, different that you can add, that, one of the possibilities of what you can do with Arcade. And so I've done the same thing with the trees layer where we have the expressions over. And I'm not going to go through these just for the sake of time, but it's pretty much the same process of what we just did with the grave layer. So now we're at the point where our web map is reflecting the editing configurations that we had in the Web App Builder application. And so now we're going to go over to Experience Builder, and I've already set this up just so we could kind of just play around with the Smart Editor. And there's another webinar that we have that goes over how to kind of set up this whole layout in Experience Builder. But for the sake of time, we're just going to look at the Smart Editor. So if I wanted to get the editing capabilities over into Experience Builder, I'm just going to add the Edit widget, put it here, and then we'll see it looks the same as it did in the web map. And so basically all the configurations we set up should also be retained here. And so if I click on one, if I click on a grave, we'll see same thing. Everything is working as we expected. And one thing that you can do here, so we know that we only want the trees and the grave layer to be editable, is that I'll just go over here and select which layers are editable. And this won't impact the smart form configurations we've set up, but we'll just clean it up a little bit. So now we have basically completed our task of getting the Web App Builder application editing configurations over to Experience Builder. And I wanted to also touch on some of the Web App Builder configurations that we didn't go over in this application that weren't really necessary for this particular example. But in the Smart Editor, we also have address and coordinates. So basically this is where, let's say with the trees layer, if we set up coordinates, it could auto-calculate the coordinates of the point feature to a field. And then also it could auto-calculate an address through reverse geocoding. And so if we want to replicate that with the forms, what we're going to do is set up some expressions. And so I've set it up on this example layer. And if I go to edit, I'll just show you what it looks like for the final product. If I put down a tree, it is auto-calculating the coordinates as well as the address. And then I also have a zone. So that was for a smart action over here. So we had some smart actions that deal with priorities. And so basically this will allow you to, if I have two polygon layers, and if I set up an intersection where a tree feature is intersecting both of them, I want to designate which of the polygon is priority that I want it to which one I want it to take the attributes from. So I've set that up here where we have two polygon layers, and then this one is going to be the priority. So if this tree feature is intersecting both, I want it to take the attributes of priority 1. So if I move this, we'll see that it's going to also auto-calculate the zone with the correct priority. So if I move it, it changes the coordinates, it changes the address. Pretty cool functionality. But so now we're going to look into the expressions to see what they look like. Let it load. Okay. So here we have the coordinates expression. So go here. So this is just a function that I got from one of those Esri resources that I had on the PowerPoint. And basically it's just taking information, the geometry, and then returning the lat and long. And then the other one I wanted to talk about is address. So address is a little bit more tricky because there's not actually a way to reverse geocode just with Arcade. You're going to have to have an address feature layer where it can pull that data from. So that's the workaround for the address functionality. So if we go here, we'll see that what it's doing basically is getting the address points that I had added to the map. It's creating a buffer, doing an intersect, getting all the addresses that are within a certain distance, and then it's returning the one that is the closest distance away and returning that address attribute. So that is how that one is working. And then this one, we have it getting those two polygon layers, and then it's intersecting with getting the intersect of the two polygon layers, and then basically running this bit of code that will designate, it will end up using the one polygon that is priority 1 as the value if it intersects both. So that is how you would replicate the other aspects of Web App Builder using Arcade. And what's really cool about this is that in Arcade, there are so many options of what you can do. You can be really creative with it. You can use whole different functions, etc., to be able to do a lot more than what you could have done in the Smart Editor, just using the Smart Forms. I look like I'm running out of time a little bit, but just wanted to show you really quickly. This is some stuff that I've set up with a polygon layer that you just wouldn't be able to do with the Smart Editor. And so I create this polygon layer. Oops. So basically what I've done here is that I'm auto calculating within this polygon the names, which we kind of went over with that one. It's also grabbing the number of graves that are completely within this polygon and also auto calculating square footage. So these are just some options that you can work with and play around with in your maps for configuring editing settings.